Good morning. I'm Paula Horner, a member of the AIM team, Accessibility and Inclusion Ministry. We are an AIM congregation within the UUA. This designation was earned due to a number of years of work fulfilling requirements to show our commitment as a congregation to the full participation of people with disabilities. In September 2008, we presented our first worship service titled, "The State of Developmental Disabilities, What Are We Waiting For?" At that time, there were significant waiting lists for services, especially residential services for adults. Today, we're giving you an update. Today's service is titled, "The State of Intellectual Disabilities, Where Are We Now?" You will notice the change in terminology, but we're still talking about the same population. We're talking about people who have difficulties with cognitive abilities that occurred before age 18. While not always visible, these disabilities can result in limitations in activities of daily living, including self-care, learning, communication, and being able to live and work independently. Today, two members of our AIM team, Lynn Smith and Gail Bishop, will share their personal journeys over the past almost 11 years. Our speaker today, Buff Hennessy, Regional Director of the ARC Southeast Region, was our speaker in 2008 as well. She is well-versed in the history, accomplishments, and work of this organization, advocating for people with intellectual disabilities for almost 60 years. Our shared plate this morning is the Kathy Yoss Scholarship Fund, named in honor of a member of our AIM team. You'll hear more about that later. And we have special music selected and performed by Laurie Helmers. We will begin our service, as we always do, with the lighting of the chalice. These words are from James Vila Blake. Love is the spirit of the church, and service, its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Good morning. My name is Christy Like. I am the Enrichment Division Director at Possibilities, where I've been for the past 23 years. Possibilities is a private nonprofit organization which creates opportunities for children and adults with disabilities to contribute to and connect with their community. We are very fortunate to have the Kathy Yoss Scholarship Fund for children and young adults who participate in our youth recreation program based at the YMCA. As many of you know, Kathy is a gifted educator and leader in services for children with disabilities. Her commitment to the children she walked with was honored by Ann and Noel Peterson and other colleagues and friends by establishing the Kathy Yoss Scholarship Fund. Possibilities uses the Scholarship Fund to help with camp fees or activity fees so kids can participate in activities of their choosing. The Scholarship Fund supports 10 to 15 children per year who are able to participate in community-based activities based on community-based experiences they would otherwise miss. We are grateful to Kathy Yoss for her continued contribution to the Scholarship Fund and to you for your matching contributions, which supports our work. Thank you for supporting the Kathy Yoss Scholarship Fund.
I'm Lynn Smith, and this is my reflection. Time has gone by quickly. Our son Chip is turning 39 this year and has lived in a small group home run by Cardinal of Minnesota since 2002. When Buff Hennessy spoke to our church in 2008, I remember feeling very confident and also very lucky about our future. Now, in 2019, I know that we just can't sit back and expect everything to be okay. Frustrations with our state and federal government have intensified over the years. Living in a small group home in a regular neighborhood is made possible by having a developmental disability-based waiver. Funding for the disability waivers fall under medical assistance, which is under Medicaid. This means that both the state or the federal government has a significant impact on the funding that allows Chip to live in a community-based home with 3 other housemates. In 2012, our state legislature implemented an across-the-board 1.5% rate reduction to all developmental disabilities waiver services. Last year, the federal government in Minnesota had a communication issue that resulted in a 7% cut to reimbursement for community-based disability services. This puts all community-based services in jeopardy. A remedy was included in the final spending bill of 2018, but unfortunately, it was vetoed by the governor. This year, legislation has been introduced to correct the deficit. Hopefully, it will be signed before the end of the legislative year. These are examples of the complexity of the legislative process and why we have to stay alert for changes to Medicaid that affect funding to support community-based living. Steve and I need to be systematically watching the news, watching for email alerts that we've signed up for. We write or call our state or federal legislatures whenever funding is threatened. Community-based living is also threatened by the ability to hire and retain staff for group homes. It's become very difficult to find people who want to work as direct support staff because of low wages set by the state. The direct support staff make it possible for Chip and others to live in small group homes, work in the community, and have leisure time. These are the people who have a large influence on Chip's quality of life. Individuals can make more working for fast food establishments. There is current legislation to raise the wages for direct support staff, but this has been an unsuccessful effort in the years past. Similar to other group homes, there's been a high turnover in staff at Chip's home and difficulty in finding new direct support staff. This has affected what Chip is able to do outside his home. Steve and I need to stay constantly involved and to talk to Chip to know what's going on and what's happening. When so much depends on federal and state governments, you just can't assume that others will take care of everything or that it will simply all work out. You just cannot rest once your child is through the school and special ed and living in a group home. You have to stay on top of things. Despite the uncertainty and a need to maintain a constant vigil, there are positive developments for Chip's future since 2008. Both of our daughters want to serve as Chip's guardian when Steve and I can no longer do so. They communicate frequently with Chip, and they do not hesitate to give us feedback on what we should or should not be doing. They will be able to work with the ARC Minnesota Southeast region to provide oversight from a distance. The ARC Minnesota has established the ARC Minnesota Master Pool Trust Fund, in which we have set up a supplemental needs fund for Chip. It is a relief to know that when both of us are gone, this will provide Chip with the financial means to maintain his quality of life, and that it will be overseen by longtime advocates for individuals with developmental disabilities. We have lived in 6 cities and 4 different states since Chip was born in 1980. In 1993, we were living in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, very close to our families, but we chose to move back to Rochester. We made this difficult decision to return to Minnesota, leaving behind our extended families, friends, and much warmer weather, because of what we knew Minnesota and Rochester offered: a support system for Chip to do what most people do: leave home, live in a house in a neighborhood, and work in the community. I know the support system wasn't easy to accomplish, and it's certainly not simple to maintain, but advocates such as the ARC of Minnesota and their supporters have worked very hard for many years to make it all possible.
A Credo for Support, in memory of Tracy Lattimore, written by Norman Kunk and Emma Vanderclift. Do not see my disability as the problem. Recognize that my disability is an attribute. Do not see my disability as a deficit. It is you who see me as deviant and helpless. Do not try to fix me because I am not broken. Support me. I can make my contribution to the community in my own way. Do not see me as your client. I am your fellow citizen. See me as your neighbor. Remember, none of us can be self-sufficient. Do not try to modify my behavior. Be still and listen. What you define as inappropriate may be my attempt to communicate with you in the only way I can. Do not try to change me. You have no right. Help me learn what I want to know. Do not hide your uncertainty behind professional distance. Be a person who listens and does not take my struggle away from me by trying to make it all better. Do not use theories and strategies on me. Be with me. And when we struggle with each other, let that give use to self-reflection. Do not try to control me. I have a right to my power as a person. What you call non-compliance or manipulation may actually be the only way I can exert some control over my life. Do not teach me to be obedient, submissive, and polite. I need to feel entitled to say no if I am to protect myself. Do not be charitable towards me. The last thing the world needs is another Jerry Lewis. Do not try to be my friend. I deserve more than that. Get to know me. We may become friends. Do not help me, even if it does make you feel good. Ask me if I need your help. Let me show you how you can assist me. Do not admire me. A desire to live a full life does not warrant adoration. Respect me, for respect presumes equality. Do not tell, correct, and lead. Listen, support, and follow. Do not work on me. Work with me.
Morning. When Lynn asked me to speak today, she gave me the simple assignment of telling you what's happened in the lives of persons with disabilities since I was here in 2008. Simple assignment, right? It took me a while to think through this, and I went back through my 2008 notes to see really what I had talked about at that point and what had changed. So I thought I would tell you a little bit about our organization and some of the changes that we've experienced, and then talk about some of the issues that currently are affecting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and then mention a little bit about what role you can play in supporting people with disabilities to have opportunities to live, learn, work, and play in the communities of their choice. After 4 years of planning, on January 1st, 2018, 7 chapters of the ARC around the state of Minnesota merged to form the ARC Minnesota. There were several reasons for the merger: long-term sustainability, leadership and financial development, and increasing the number of people who could access our programs and services statewide. Our mission: the ARC promotes and protects the human rights of persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities, actively supporting them and their families in a lifetime of full inclusion. We have a board of directors made up of representatives from each of our regions, as well as a number of at-large members. We believe that persons with disabilities should have dreams and choices in their lives, just like all of us do. They should be able to choose where they live and with whom. They should be able to choose to work in meaningful jobs. They should be able to actively take part in their communities where their interests lie. And they should receive the supports they need to make those dreams and choices come true. We all know that none of us get everything that we want in life, but we need to develop a culture that allows persons with disabilities the opportunities to grow to their potential. In order to help develop that culture, we continue to provide our core services of advocacy, support, and education. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about our advocacy programs. So we provide individual and family advocacy, where we work directly with a person with a disability or their family to help them obtain and maintain services, to help ensure their rights are being honored, to resolve disputes with schools, providers, and counties, to provide information so individuals and families can better advocate for themselves. We host a self-advocacy program where we teach adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities how to advocate for themselves, how to have more control over their lives, the opportunity to learn leadership skills so they can teach other self-advocates, and to prepare them to become involved members of their communities. We provide housing advocacy by assisting adults with disabilities who are ready to move into their own home or apartment within the community, as well as assisting individuals who are ready to leave a nursing home or hospital setting to move into a less restrictive environment. We provide public policy and systems advocacy at the regional, state, and local and federal level. We host the Region 10 Quality Council, which is the result of legislation that we initiated. This council is made up of a diverse membership of persons with a variety of disabilities, providers, counties, families, state personnel, and interested community members. Shelley is one of our members. The council's role is to assess the quality of services and supports persons with disabilities receive, identify trends and barriers to improve quality of life. Individuals who receive support services are interviewed, so we have the actual voice of the person who receives services to talk about their values and the quality that they're looking for in their life. We provide training opportunities about pertinent issues. We host community conversations in order to identify ways to build community engagement and further develop inclusive communities. One of those conversations is going to be hosted here on Wednesday night, and Shelley will be a part of that. They make recommendations to the State Quality Council to help develop statewide priorities to be addressed. We also work with elected officials to help ensure that legislation is in place to provide the protections that vulnerable people need, while also offering opportunities that allow for persons to grow, to take an element of risk, to receive the supports that are needed. Our work addresses issues, concerns, and roadblocks in the system, as well as proposing ideas for new ways to improve the system. Most persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities are dependent on government funding in order to receive the services and supports they need. Lynn referenced this in her talk, but Minnesota is highly dependent on the federal program medical assistance and Medicaid to match state dollars in order to financially support programs and services for persons with disabilities. For many years, Medicaid dollars could only be spent in hospitals or institutional settings. But in 1984, Minnesota was granted a waiver from the federal government that would allow us to use those dollars in small community settings. That waiver allowed for individuals to receive their own waiver in order to provide individualized services. This allowed the development of smaller, more personalized services in communities throughout the state. However, a person with a disability didn't automatically receive a waiver, and for many years we had long waiting lists, sometimes more than 5,000 people waiting for services. We worked for years to reduce or eliminate that waiting list, and just when we were successful in getting legislation to do that, the workforce shortage occurred, and providers were forced to start their own waiting lists because they couldn't hire enough employees to work with the individuals needing services. The workforce shortage has caused some providers to close homes and other programs, and several of those closures have occurred in southeastern Minnesota. The average pay for a direct support professional in Minnesota is $12.32 an hour. As you know, this is not a living wage, so many staff are forced to work more than one job. Oftentimes, supervisors are forced to work direct care, so they're not able to do their jobs, and people are turned away from services. The combination of many factors, including low wages, limited career ladder, and not enough people in the workforce, has led there to being over 8,700 open positions statewide in the developmental disability system currently. In 2018, the Minnesota Department of Human Services heard from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services that there was a problem with Minnesota's rate-setting policy, which resulted in a 7% reduction to the reimbursement rate for several thousands of persons with disabilities. Lynn referenced that as well. If the legislature doesn't fix the problem this current session, by the end of 2019, all persons with disabilities who receive services funded by a Medicaid waiver will have their reimbursement rates cut by that 7%. If that occurs, it's likely that we will see more program reductions and closures. If that isn't enough strain on the system, in 2009, Minnesota put a moratorium on the development of new corporate foster care. Corporate foster care is what you typically think of as group homes with 24-hour staff that are typical homes in typical neighborhoods throughout our communities. The Department of Human Services felt that particular model of care was too expensive. Unfortunately, they didn't offer ways to serve those people who might need to continue to need that level of care. So a number of counties, including some in southeastern Minnesota, began working with families, providers, and advocates to try to find creative ways to continue to meet the needs of persons who require 24-hour care, but no longer had access to corporate foster care. A variety of models were established and new ways to support persons were in place. Then in late 2017, so several years later, DHS notified the providers of services that all of those services would need to be licensed with the same standards as corporate foster care that they had previously put the moratorium on. Gail Bishop is going to share her story related to that experience. Although Minnesota closed its state hospitals for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities nearly 20 years ago, we continued to have a state-operated setting called Minnesota Extended Treatment Options, known as MEDO, located in the former Cambridge State Hospital. It was intended for persons with developmental disabilities whose behaviors would have put them in the criminal justice system if not for their disability. It was supposed to be a setting for no more than 16 persons for not more than 90 days, while community services were developed for them. The day that it opened, it had 48 persons, and none moved within the 90 days. In 2009, parents and guardians of 3 of those residents, representing a class, filed a complaint alleging residents were unlawfully and unconstitutionally secluded and restrained. The Ombudsman for Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities investigated and wrote a scathing report about the abuses that were occurring. It was determined that there was a culture of abuse and neglect throughout the setting, not simply isolated instances. The state of Minnesota agreed to a settlement rather than a trial, and the settlement included several things. The state was to identify a goal to provide a safe and humane living environment free from abuse and neglect. Hard to believe that that was having to be directed through a lawsuit in 2009. The state agreed to form a committee to rewrite the rules to aversive and deprivation procedures, identifying what types of techniques and restraints would be prohibited. The state agreed to a financial settlement for all class members. They agreed to establish an Olmstead Committee, and in this case, Olmstead is with an A, as means to extend policies to all people with developmental disabilities, not just involved in the lawsuit. And they agreed to external monitoring of the settlement, including an external reviewer, a court monitor, and it identified those persons who had access to that compliance information. That was 2009. It took until September 30th, 2015 for Minnesota's Olmstead Plan to be approved. It was based on a 1999 U.S. Supreme Court decision finding that there was unjustified segregation of persons with disabilities and that it constituted discrimination in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, known as ADA. That lawsuit was filed by some women in the state of Georgia who wanted to move into the community and were living in a state institution and were not allowed to move, and it ended up all the way at the United States Supreme Court. After the Supreme Court decision, each state was encouraged to develop an Olmstead Plan. That's what the name of the case was. Minnesota didn't begin developing their plan until the Jensen settlement required them to in 2012. States' plans were to address how persons with disabilities are living, learning, working, and enjoying life in the most integrated setting. Minnesota's plan addresses 13 areas where there should be increased opportunities for persons with disabilities to receive services that best meet their needs, in the most integrated settings. And those opportunities need to improve service delivery to promote a better quality of life. There's been support for this plan, but there's been fear and trepidation as well. Some of the communication about implementation has been fearful for people, and there needs to be continued work on that. On March 29th of this year, Governor Walz signed an executive order supporting freedom of choice and opportunity to live, work, and participate in the most inclusive setting for individuals with disabilities through the implementation of Minnesota's Olmstead Plan. We hope that that executive order will encourage the leadership needed to implement a plan that meets the needs of all individuals. I would encourage your support and involvement in truly making our communities inclusive for all people and for letting your elected officials know that you support issues important to persons with disabilities. Thank you.
"11 years ago, my husband Alan shared these words in an article for ARC of Southeast Minnesota. Like any father, I love my children, provide for their needs, take pride in their skills and accomplishments, and try to prepare them for a secure and happy future. In the case of our older child, a college graduate and Fulbright scholar can reasonably expect that this will be the case. My equally dear second child, Allie, is a trusting and loving soul. She is happy with good self-esteem who takes great pride in most everything she experiences. Her smile is infectious, yet she faces an uncertain fate. At this point in time, no assurance of a roof over her head or compassionate treatment by others is expected if and when her mother Gail and I are unable to care for her. Why? Because Allie is developmentally disabled and has been denied to date the care many other children and adults in her position receive. She has no waiver and no prospect receiving one for many years, most likely decades. Allie was 19 back then, an adult, and at that time Alan's cancer diagnosis made his longevity questionable, and my chronic illness making a future as a full-time care provider increasingly uncertain. These circumstances, though not unique to us, demonstrated the precariousness of life and the vulnerability of those who can only depend upon their parents or guardians to meet their needs, conditions which currently exist for thousands of individuals in our state who are living with disabilities. A few years later, we received a partial government waiver which enabled Allison to receive respite care away from home for 1 weekend a month. This was an opportunity for Allie to get used to the idea of living away from home, and for us, a chance to sleep through the night. Gradually, this became 2 weekends per month, and the pattern continued for a couple of years until social services brought families together who had adult children of comparable ages and needs to meet and discuss future housing alternatives. We learned that the possibility of finding a good fit or even an opening in an existing group home was very limited, and perhaps not even in our community. We also learned that due to a moratorium on the creation of additional group homes enacted by our legislature in 2009, that the possibility to move our daughter into group residential housing was slim. However, we were presented with the option of starting our own home, creating a living arrangement that provided choice, being able to have Allie choose who she wanted to live with, to partner with compatible families with similar vision and values to share this journey, and to have control making decisions in relation to our adult child's needs, relationships, and communities. This was the best option for us. We did not want our eldest daughter to be faced with the lifelong burden of care for her sibling, something that would dramatically alter her life's journey. We did not want our daughter Allie to be placed somewhere or to be faced with the frightening possibility there would never be a group home that was her match after we were gone. We were very fortunate to have the resources to consider creating our own group home, a luxury not afforded to many in our situation, something we regard with incredible gratitude. Eventually, with another family, we formed our own group home, transitioning our daughters into their home. After a few months, a third young woman joined the ranks. She was in her mid-40s and her parents in their mid-80s. Her parents were about to go to assisted living, and until she found us, would have had nowhere to go. Familiar furnishings were brought from our homes, the girls adding their own decorating flares to their rooms. Families got together regularly. The home was staffed by loving and caring caregivers from Cardinal of Minnesota, and as parents, a giant sigh of relief was felt by all. Then as now, our lives fill with the role of parenting a child with disabilities, becoming champions of the cause, joining organizations and boards, taking part as vocal advocates for our daughters' rights. Establishing this home made us soar with confidence, proud that this step was taken and managed. Frankly, this offered us a sense of freedom. Raising a child with a developmental disability is like a marathon. If you want to win, you need to take some breaks along the way. But this marathon goes on into the foreseeable future and beyond. So this group home, which we call the Lake House because it's on Lake Street, gave us this break. However, life is messy and unpredictable. Imagine a scenario where the government tells you you can no longer live in your own home unless you follow their rules. Over a year ago, we were told that our home, along with 500 other homes in the state, most of which were begun by parents, would need to become licensed, or the Department of Human Services would close us down. This was in response to discovering that several of these private homes were unsafe and mismanaged. In theory, this may sound like a sound plan. After all, who does not want homes to be safe for people living with disabilities? Why not make everyone who has their home be a licensed facility? We had been told by the county case management, as extension of the Human Services Department, that one could create their own home as a housing option. We did all the safety measures and beyond. We formed an LLC, had the home routinely inspected by the fire marshal, had rental agreements with the families, had excellent staffing. The home resides in a wonderful neighborhood with terrific neighbors, had daughters who had adjusted to living away from home, provided a home with choice, became stewards of the government waivers. It was a safe place with alarms and security systems. It was truly a home with a sense of family, a place for our girls to live for the rest of their lives, and it belonged to us. It was a private home. We also wanted a home where the working environment for staff was welcoming. Instead of looking at the hundreds of homes which for years had been working successfully, were less expensive and solved a housing shortage for people living with disabilities as another option, the moratorium on the establishment of additional group homes was opened, and the decision to pull the unlicensed private homes under this umbrella was made. Time was not on our side, and we went to work seeking help from our state legislators. Senator Nelson championed our concern and met with several families in Olmsted County who were facing the same dilemma. After several weeks, the senator had drafted bipartisan language that would give families and the Department of Human Services a year to look at alternative housing options and legal definitions of group residential housing. We met with attorneys on the legislative side as well as legal representatives from DHS, and we were promised that regardless of the passage of the bill proposed by Senator Nelson, we would be consulted as parents who had created a successful group home to explore viable and creative alternatives to licensed adult foster care. The bill was included in the 2018 Omnibus Bill, and Governor Dayton failed its passage. We were forced to become licensed as of July 1st of last summer, and were granted the ability to hold a license as an LLC, even though we do not currently fit under existing licensing definitions. We did not want our home to be under the control of a provider. We started this home to have control, not to be under the control of another entity. It was also our understanding that the Health and Human Services Department was looking into housing alternatives, even as the extension asked for in this bill was being contemplated. We were invited to participate in discussions with them following the legislative session, regardless of the outcome of the bill's passage. Needless to say, we have not been contacted to be part of the creative process in the Department of Human Services. The moratorium is back on. Because of the moratorium, there are little if no options for adult children with disabilities to have a home to live in and be cared for if their parents or guardians are unable to do so, because the creation of new corporate adult foster care homes is prohibited. The only way a person can live in a group home today is if someone currently in a home dies or moves away. The door is closed to be able to live in a group home, leaving hundreds of families with a hopeless future. For us, we are back at the legislature to create a bill to change this. Bear in mind that as parents of someone with a disability, we are acting not only as mom and dad, but also lenders, lawyers, financial planners, nurses, babysitters, chauffeurs, property managers, and therapists to our vulnerable children. And consider Allie's housemates' parents who were elderly, still are, and in addition to these responsibilities, were living on a fixed income, still caring for their daughter with Down syndrome before fate or good fortune brought us together. Couple this with the existential difficulty of admitting one's own mortality and attempting to plan for a future past one's own lifespan leaves parents, and in particular aging parents of adults with disabilities, in despair. This is a role for which they and we did not volunteer. What also hasn't changed is every passing year results in more desperate and difficult situations. All agencies, providers, care coordinators, all working in the field of disabilities are facing the results of the 7% cut in their funding, as mentioned by Buff and Lynn. We are at the mercy of Medicaid funding dollars and rate allocations by our state government. Combine this with that worker shortage and the inability to pay personnel because they are fixed at reimbursement rates established by the government, it's difficult to retain staff in group homes like ours, having turnover staffing rates near 40%. This results in inconsistent care, overworked personnel, and often clients who receive less than adequate services. How we take care of people in our community is what defines us. A just society stands with people with disabilities and offers them the same opportunities and respects their equality with all people. In a just society, people with disabilities are not pushed to the margins, but are integrated and fully a part of social life and so recognized as a valuable part of the human family. And that means to be truly inclusive when asked. Please be the voice for those who cannot advocate in their own defense. Help them and their families to win the race. We are in this marathon together. Remember, you don't need to win. You just need to make it to the finish line.
Get connected in whatever way you are comfortable. Our benediction today is by Frederick E. Gillis. May the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us now and always. Go in peace.